After a long and convoluted design history, the US Navy had finally started work on building its first class of destroyer escorts, the Everts class, in February 1942. Unfortunately, since this was also just after the US had officially entered World War II, the number of this type of ship that was needed suddenly began to rise extremely fast, and it turned out some changes were needed to the basic design. What happened was that, with the Pearl Harbor attacks, everything the US Navy had under construction was suddenly being built in much, much larger numbers, and this included submarines. That was a problem for the Destroyer Escort program, because it was supposed to use a large number of diesel engines to avoid the bottleneck that was the production of gearing sets for geared turbines. Only now, diesels were also in high demand as submarine construction was being ramped up, and since the originally planned 8 diesels in an Everts could supply the power for 2 submarines, the class had been redesigned at the last minute to use just 4 diesels. But with this giving a lower than desired speed, and there was no scope for additional diesel requisitions, attention turned to other possible power plants. The first solution that was arrived at was turboelectric propulsion, basically swapping out the diesels for steam turbines. This could work because the shortage that had forced the Everts class off of steam in the first place wasn't the lack of boilers, or indeed turbines, it was the gearing set at the end of that powertrain. With a turboelectric drive, the gearing would simply be replaced with generators and electric motors, and this would allow a more plentiful drive resource to be used. And the original planned speed of 24 knots, or a little bit more if you really pushed it, could be obtained. There were some downsides, though, which was part of the reason why turboelectric drive hadn't won out in the initial Destroyer Escort design process. The turboelectric drive was larger and heavier, and this would force the hull to be made longer to accommodate it. That pushed the design displacement up by around 300 tons to about 1,400 tons light and 1,750 tons at full load, which was similar to the average pre-war destroyer in many navies. This, of course, would also mean a slightly increased build time and cost, but the ability to mass-produce them all won out over any possible downsides, and the Buckley class would see its first ships laid down in the summer of 1942. As mentioned, the class ran on a turboelectric drive with 13,500 shaft horsepower from the turbines, which was stepped through a pair of electric motors, providing a top speed of 24 knots on paper, although many ships would turn out to be a bit faster than that in practice if you absolutely needed it. The main armament would remain the same at 3 single 3-inch guns, a pair superfiring forward and 1 aft, plus a Hedgehog launcher and depth charges. However, the additional hull length also allowed for the inclusion of a triple torpedo launcher and a few additional anti-aircraft guns. Initially just a few more Oerlikons, but there proved to be space and weight for a balance of a slight increase in the 20mm battery and the additional installation of either some 1.1-inch or Bofors 40mm medium anti-aircraft guns as well, depending on what was available at the time. As befitting its role, a slew of radar and sonar was also included. This overall increase in capabilities was considered so successful that the Buckley-style hull was deemed to be the new template from which all other destroyer escort designs were to be taken, and in total 154 would be ordered, all but half a dozen of which would be completed as destroyer escorts. Although the majority of the class would serve under the Stars and Stripes, 46 would be transferred to the Royal Navy to serve as part of the Captain class of frigates, which opted for standardising the dedicated anti-aircraft suite around purely 40mm Oerlikons. 4 American and 2 British ships would be lost in action, although a significantly larger number would be badly damaged but survive long enough to be towed back to port before being declared irreparable, which, although it removed them from Navy lists, was obviously much better for crew survivability. In exchange, though, they reaped a fearsome toll of enemy craft, mostly, of course, submarines. Towards the end of the war, just over 3 dozen were converted into APDs, or high-speed troop transports, with most of the survivors then heading into reserve almost as soon as the war ended, thanks to both the general drawdown on ship numbers and the numbers of newer destroyer escorts available. But a few would be sold on, serving in a further 7 foreign navies, and although the last of the US-flagged vessels went to the breakers in the early 1970s, some of those in foreign service lasted into the 21st century in various guises. But, as far as I know, none survive today.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.